Welcome to the Problematic Podcast, where I interview leaders who are solving important problems and improving lives. Follow this podcast to hear from visionary business leaders every single week. And now here's Jenny Sheets. Okay, Jenny, could you tell us about yourself and what problem you're solving?
Yeah, my name is Jenny Sheets. I'm the founder of Discover Outdoors. And the problem I'm solving is our kind of lack of really authentic, meaningful human connections these days. I think technology is pulling us apart, our focus on efficiency is pulling us apart, and not to mention just post COVID, our relationships are broken. So, yeah, the problem I'm trying to solve is loneliness.
Okay. So could you explain your business a little bit more?
Absolutely. So, Discover Outdoors is a social design company where we build social infrastructure to strengthen human connections. So that means,
Okay.
in Discover Outdoors, it's in the name. Ideally, outdoors. I'd love to bring people as outside of your house, outside of your work, outside of your car. But what we do is we look at the holistic picture of what is required to create a community. So it's more than just an event. It's more than just building a venue. It's where let's meet people where they're at. If they're stuck on social media, how do we get them off of that? If people are stuck in their homes, how do we encourage them to leave their home? If they're nervous to, say ride a bike instead of drive a car, how do we approach that culturally? So kind of look at the whole picture of how do we bring people together, and what are all the facets needed to address in that.
Okay. So could you explain your business from scratch, like from idea to like where it got to now?
Yeah, so like the whole founding story of my company.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's only 1 year old, so it's not even that old. But I kind of started with, well, first, selfishly, just a desire to meet more people in the outdoor recreation world. So, living in the Midwest, there are outdoor recreational opportunities, but culturally, it's not as prevalent as, say, out west where I'm from, or, California, some of these other areas. So, I really wanted to meet people. So, I thought I'm going to start, building a business around promoting the trails and cool areas. I'm going to start doing meetups. But then it evolved, and I started to see that what people were hiring me for wasn't just outdoor recreation, but it was this idea of bringing people together and strengthening those connections. So the clients that I started to work with were more of that kind of social infrastructure side of things. So from there, now it's been a year, and really starting to narrow in on this idea of building social infrastructure, which is a phrase I took from that US Surgeon General's warning on the epidemic of loneliness in that report. And I didn't even know what it was. I thought, what is social infrastructure? So it's my business is still very much evolving, but it's always been on that social component side of things.
Could you explain like one of the projects you've worked on before?
Absolutely. I think a really fun project I did was with the city of Moorhead. So the city manager approached me and said, we need someone to just shake things up a little bit. We want to think differently, and we really want to narrow in on placemaking. Placemaking is creating this kind of sense of place for people so they feel a sense of pride and a sense of belonging. And for the first time ever, the city of Moorhead had put in their comprehensive master plan an emphasis on placemaking. But people were thinking, what does it mean? How do we really approach this? We all want it. How do we do it? So they hired me to come in and kind of assess where placemaking opportunities could be. So something fun I got to do was just take my 3-year-old son on bike rides and walks and just get to know Moorhead, where I live, but in a different way. Like, okay, what's it like to bike from my house to the river trails? And then once I'm on the river trails, where do I go? Is it easy to understand? Where do I want to just pause and hang out? And that's what I really started to take note of. So we created then two kind of experiments to see, can we get more people downtown and along the rivers? So one of those experiments was to do an enchanted river walkway in the winter. So we hung up lights and did art installations on a half-mile section of the river trail, and it was so beautiful and so cool to see. And then the other one was to do a winter art walk downtown. Because in talking to people, I did a lot of focus groups. I found out that people had never even really set foot in downtown Moorhead. They'd driven through to go from point A to point B, but how do we get people just to slow down? So there's a really beautiful section of downtown Moorhead along the river, and we had businesses open up their doors, host a local artist, and host refreshments. And we promoted it through the Convention and Visitors Bureau. and just got people to come downtown. So it was a really cool project just to see, like, with just a little bit of effort and a little bit of focus, we can start getting people to congregate and meet each other.
That is super cool. So, could you fill us in a little bit on your backstory and like what led you up to where you are today?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, and spent about half my life in Montana. So different areas: Billings on the east side, Bozeman on the west side, Missoula in the northwest corner. So um, during the pandemic, I had a baby, and so my husband and I decided we need to go back to family. So we're going to go back to the Midwest, and came back to Fargo after 16, 17 years away, and it was a totally different city. But we kind of didn't know what we were doing. Of, do we, change careers? What are we like? We have had a baby. Our whole life was just kind of changed. So I'd been working in the tech industry. I was in marketing. I have just quite a diverse background. I just love to kind of seize exciting opportunities. I've worked in nonprofits, done fundraising. I've taught college writing. But when I moved here, there was an excellent opportunity to lead the startup programming and build that ecosystem. So when I was there, I gained so much opportunity on experiences and events that bring people together, gathering resources, just talking to key individuals, and get to be closer to family here. And that's kind of what helped me launch my business.
So, what was your biggest learning from like that networking there?
Ooh, so I'll be honest about something. I hated networking going into it. Hated it. Like, the idea of having to have small talk over coffee was like, I think I would have rather gouged my eyes out. So I think my biggest learning is that it was a skill I had to learn. Just like riding a bike. Like, when I was a kid, I remember riding a bike was awful. Like, learning how to ride was awful. I was so mad I couldn't just pick it up. Like, every day I had to practice. And I'm thinking about this now because my 3 year old is trying to learn how to ride a bike. And it was so frustrating. But it's not that you just like try it once and get it. You have to keep doing it, and then pretty soon you love it. So that's what I found with networking, is that at first it seemed like such a chore, and just laborious and time consuming. But then I just learned to love it, of like, wow, you're not, if you're there to like get something out of someone, it's going to feel like a chore. Like, if you're like, ooh, I'm going to talk to Devin because I want his sale. I need him as a client. Well, that's so hard and gross. But if you're there to just see that every single person has a unique story, it becomes so, there's such less stress that goes into it, and it actually becomes really fun. And I've met some of my closest friends through those events.
Really? So, it improved your life once you worked on that skill?
Oh, vastly, vastly. Because now I feel like I can talk to anyone and I'm really comfortable. It also has taught me to just not be intimidated in rooms where I used to be greatly intimidated. I actually worked on building my own app for a few years and was seeking capital and starting to get into that world. And it was so intimidating to feel like I knew nothing in a room, and that these people who had money or a title or whatever it be, oh, they're clearly more important than me. And that's not the case. So, like, learning how to network and talk to people really helped me see we're all equal, we're just humans, everybody's figuring it out. So, it was really a great life skill to learn.
So, what advice do you have for someone else who is trying to become a little bit better at networking?
Whew. Practice, practice, practice. It's so awkward at first. It's so awkward for a long time if you're not used to it. But just keep going. So if you go to one or two events and you're like, oh my gosh, I was the most awkward person in the room, just know that 10 other people are thinking the exact same thing about themselves, and to just keep going. I also like to lead with a question that's not, what do you do for work? Because that's the question everybody gets, but instead, like, oh, it's the middle of summer. What's the most exciting thing you've done? Or, if you could take any trip in the world, where would you go? Or what are your hobbies? Like, what do you like to do for fun? Like, just kind of getting to know somebody on that level is really fun.
It's just to make it seem more human or personal or something?
Exactly. And then it doesn't feel like networking, but that you're just like hanging out with a
Yeah.
bunch of soon to be friends.
So, could you tell us about what drives you and what's your why?
That's a great question, because I actually just figured it out recently. So I have been building community my entire life, but I just never knew it. I have worked in restaurants for many years, which is community building. You want somebody to feel special, you want them to feel hosted. I've worked at nonprofits, I've worked in tech, like I told you, about building the online communities. And it wasn't until just recently that I realized I've been hosting my entire life. I love to show people a special, unique experience. And the reason is to combat loneliness. And that's my why, is that it sucks to be lonely. We've all had those moments in our life where we feel like we don't really have our community, we don't really fit in. Maybe we've moved somewhere new and we don't know anybody. And then there are people who are plagued by loneliness because they're really shy or, just haven't found that niche yet. So I realize my why is to absolutely ensure that nobody has to feel lonely, whether that's just finding your own community or being able to walk into a space and feel social without having to socialize. So that's my why.
What's like the biggest reasons that makes people feel lonely today, like in this age or like in 2024?
Okay. Um, so I think if we're thinking about 2024, especially post pandemic, we are really out of habit of creating those human connections and just getting into the habit of going out. I mean, we see this with like concert tickets are declining, sporting events are declining. People just are having a tough time going out, and it's because we feel like we don't have to. Oh, I'm comfortable in my home. Oh, I already have my set group of friends. Oh, I'm just going to stay online tonight. Whatever it is, however many reasons. And I think then people don't realize that they're lonely. And we have a lot of talk, like, I hear so much about, oh, people are just introverted. And I think that that's kind of a cop out. I think we do have a lot of introverts and they should be respected, and extroverts should be respected, and everybody should be for who they are. However, everyone can benefit from just having the energy of other humans, and knowing that somebody cares if you're around. That's really important in a community, is knowing that considering the well-being of your community members. So I think what adds to the loneliness is just that, like, we're really out of habit and we have to be very cognizant of how much we need human connection. So if every one of us thought of that, then just force yourself to go to the grocery store instead of doing online shopping, like just something like that, or force yourself to go for a walk around the block and wave to a couple of neighbors, like little baby steps like that.
Could you explain the value of a good relationship or connection?
I mean, I'm not a psychologist by any means, but if, I think we all know what it feels like when somebody cares about you. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be best friends with everyone. And it doesn't have to be a blood relative. Like if you're thinking, oh, I don't have family or I don't have best friends. But it's just somebody who says, like, Devin, I didn't see you at our book group last week. Like, everything okay? That little check in is so important. We're social creatures and we've always lived in communities since the dawn of humanity. And we're starting to pull away. And I think we'll come back. I really think that we'll level set. But just, you need people to look out for you, because none of us are an island, and we all need that human connection. That's just who we are as animals.
Okay. So could you give us a little bit of advice you would give to your 18-year-old self?
Whoa, okay. I think my 18-year-old self was very social, very extroverted. Um, so I think even now I need to remind myself, like, get outside, go meet people. I think the advice to my 18-year-old self is to probably work harder at building community.
Mm,
So I think that I had the energy and ability at that age to bring people together. But I think as so many 18-year-olds, I was just thinking about myself, about what am I going to do for college? What am I wearing? Who's what am I going to do this weekend? But I think I could have harnessed that energy into really bringing people together. So I think some advice on that, just to work hard to make sure that everyone else is included in the circle and has equal opportunity.
okay. So what are some ways that someone can find a good community or like a good group of like five friends to?
That's great. I'm so glad you said that. That it really is like five friends, and that's what my mom has always taught me since I was a little kid. She said her mom would say, "When I die, if I have five good friends, then I'll consider myself a lucky person." So you're right. You just need like some people around, or those five friends. I think Go to events where you can talk to someone. If you want to go to like a concert just because you need that energy, that's also equally important. But it's also important to like go to an event where you get to just have small talk with the person next to you. So whether that is a networking event, if that interests you, or maybe it's an art class, or you're trying a new sport, or you're going to do a dance class, I think my advice would just be to not be afraid and not be embarrassed, which is so easier said than done. But that your future self will thank you for trying, and just go have those conversations. And if you start to have a passion in an area, you're going to then attract similar people who also have a passion in that area, and just lean into it, whether it's biking or reading or art or soccer. Just try to find your people, and even if it's one at a time, that's something.
Could you explain the, like, if you have a toxic friend, like, how can that have an impact on, like, your own life?
That's a great question. I think, toxic people, we have to look at like, okay, what's going on in their life that's causing them to kind of suck the energy out of people, and they're probably going through some struggles. But if you feel like you are giving way more energy than you're receiving, then it might be time to step back and just take a break. Because really, there are some people who add energy to a room, and then there are some people who really suck it out. And what I try to do, because I've been a host and I've done events, and when you're a host, you are responsible for the guests in that room. When I can see that there's somebody who's trying to suck the energy out of a room, you just don't give them attention. And so if you've got a friend, like let's just call them Joe, and Joe is your toxic friend, and he's just sucking all the energy, and he's taking all your time, and he's draining you, and he's ruining friendships, to try not to give the energy, but also just be there, because they probably need help and they're just crying out in different ways. However, for the empaths out there who want to solve everybody else's problems, you just got to step away a little bit to take care of yourself. And that's what builds a community, is that we're all taking care of ourselves and looking out for the well-being of others.
So how do you, like, are there any specific tactics that you use to build like a really strong, tight-knit community?
Definitely. There are kind of formulas for building community. Lots of different books on this. I think something that I do is first, like I mentioned with my company, is we look at like all the components. Like, okay, let's identify who's our target audience. Is it a demographic? Are we trying to target people who just graduated college and we don't want them to leave? Or is it a neighborhood? Like, okay, we want to target these 8 blocks and get them to build community. So targeting that specific group and then talking to those people. What do they want? Who are they? Do they feel connected? Do they feel disconnected? Um, don't ever be presumptuous. Like, I don't really know what 18-year-olds want anymore. So I need to talk to them about,
Mm.
what is it that would keep you connected to your community? So then once you gather that feedback, look for patterns and similarities and commonalities between everyone, and then start to identify. At least what I do is I love to create experiments. Okay, let's experiment and see, do people need a space? Okay, let's try to identify a space where everybody can hang out. Or is it that they feel like they don't even know what's going on in their community? Do we need an online calendar? So then you start to build that community, and then getting people together in the same room or face to face on the trail, wherever it is, and getting those people to talk to each other. The strength of the community will only come from within the community, and not an external person like myself or a leader, a city manager trying to make it happen. So, how do we get people excited to talk to one another, passionate, and looking out for each other? And that does take some work that's going to be unique to each community.
Right. Okay. So how can listeners get involved and support you and what you're doing?
I'd love it if you check out my website, getoutnorth.com. Right now, it's focused heavily on trails and outdoor recreation in our region. And get on there, sign up for the newsletter. There's also a link to consulting services, so you can get a little better idea of what I do. But what we also have is a way to contribute those outdoor recreational activities. So if you have a secret spot, camping, hiking, biking, skiing, that you would love highlighted, then it's not so secret, but we could highlight it. We'll put it on the website. We want to build that community, and there are a million communities to build and a million ways to build it. Just the way that I've chosen to build mine is through outdoor recreation. So I'd love to invite everybody to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
coming on.
This has been a blast. Thanks, Devin.
Yeah. Thank you.